pour yourself a sweet tea, pull up a lawn chair, and turn the page with us. You're listening to Right On Mississippi, a podcast taking you inside the minds of America's treasured wordsmiths. I'm Ellen Rogers, and Right On Mississippi is produced in partnership with Mississippi Public Broadcasting for the Mississippi Book Festival and the South Literary Lawn Party. We are here with Juliet Grames today, and she is talking to us about her new book, The 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna. It came out on April 19th, correct? May 19th. And it was in the Indie Next book pick, which is amazing. It was a Harper lead read. So, Juliet, we are so thrilled that you were here. This book is astonishing, and it's so great. I tell all the debut novelists that, like a really good debut novel is my favorite thing.
Well, I am so happy to be here, and I'm saying this very genuinely and not in a pandering way at all. I had the opportunity to visit Mississippi for 3 days last year, and I was just so struck by everything here, by the book and literary culture, by the food scene, by how kind and warm the people were. And so for me, it's been a real honor to attend the festival and to have a chance to get to know Jackson a little bit better. So thank you so much for having me.
We are so thrilled for you to be here and to talk. I'm so thrilled to talk to you about this book. I've read some about you. I've read the book, and so I want to talk to you just kind of about you and how you came up with this story. But it sounds like your family history is the major inspiration for this.
Yeah, definitely. So the 7 or 8 deaths that are referenced in the title are, this character, Stella Fortuna, has 8 near-death experiences over the course of her very long life, which lasts at least 100 years. And so the book follows her from her birth in a tiny mountain village in southern Italy, all the way through immigration to America, all kinds of family drama, especially with her sister, who she's very close to, and the bad luck things that happen along the way, the challenges she faces. And the inspiration for it really was my own Italian-American family, and specifically my grandmother, who had a really kind of wacky life story and did in fact have 8 near-death experiences herself.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that was my origin point. I was like, this is such a bizarre story. I want to try to write it as a novel.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so I didn't want to write nonfiction. So I ended up interviewing lots of people, both from my family and from the Italian-American community, and then in Italy, in Calabria, where she came from, a lot of octogenarians and nonagenarians who remembered the 1920s and 1930s.
Wow.
In Italy. And I kind of synthesized a lot of their stories to make this fiction.
Well, it worked. And I just want to talk to you about, how did you choose the perspective that you wrote from? Because that's a difficult one to pull off, and you did.
It was tricky. So the book is written mainly from Stella's point of view in third person, but there is a first-person modern narrator who interferes from time to time, and she introduces the story, and sometimes she interjects. And so I will say that I tried to write this as straight historical fiction, and I really admire writers who can just write straight historical fiction.
Oh, absolutely.
And not let their own biases and prejudices come to bear on the characters. Just be very pure to the telling of that time. But I'm not that person. I'm not strong enough. I had a lot of things I wanted to say about what, I thought this protagonist was suffering. And so there ended up being a modern narrator who interpolates from time to time.
Well, so that person was kind of you, telling your grandmother's story, basically, it seems to me.
Well, the 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna is a work of fiction, and any resemblance to persons living or dead is strictly coincidental. But yes, the first-person narrator does have a lot biographically in common with me as a coincidence, as I mentioned. So.
As just a coincidence.
Yes.
I was telling somebody the name of the book I was reading when I was reading it, and they were like, oh my God, that's the greatest name I've ever heard. I was like, truly, don't you wish your name was Stella Fortuna? But her name was Maria Stella.
Yes.
Which I had never, there was another person, it's Maria Angela.
Yes.
So it's like they put 2 names together in Italy.
It is very common to combine 2 names like that.
Yes.
And I took the name Maria Stella from someone I interviewed during the course of my research. I just thought it was such a wonderful name.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And I also like when nicknames in Italian, you often take the end of the name instead of the beginning, like most Americans do. So that's how we got Stella.
They just kind of do things I don't know better than us. I just feel like so I was telling you a moment ago, I went to Italy a few years ago with all the women in my family. We were there for like 17 days.
Amazing. Wow.
And yes, and the art, the way that Italians value art is just something I truly admire. And then the food, the relationship they have with food. I totally get that. But it's all so good and so fresh and very, there's not a ton of ingredients.
Yes.
In it. It is very straightforward, and it is just delicious. We would eat, and then I would begin the countdown on my fingers to when we could eat again.
Yeah. Food culture is hugely important in Italy, and it was a big part of my research and my writing.
Yes.
Both because, I was writing about the 1920s and 30s, which is a very poor period everywhere in the world with the depression that hit globally, but also specifically in Italy, which was at that time newly unified. They didn't have the national identity they do now. And especially when you're talking about the Italian South, like I was, and the majority of Italian Americans, their ancestors are from the south of Italy, not the north.
Interesting.
Yes,
I did not know that.
It is fascinating, and there's a long historical reason for it that I talk a little bit about in the book. But our roots are there, and I found that there's not a lot of Southern Italian food writing that's out there. There are a couple really good books, but I really wanted to represent that, especially because when you are poor, you spend a large percentage of your day trying to source food for your children.
Absolutely.
And so cooking well within those limited parameters really becomes an important part of day-to-day life. And I found when I was interviewing these elderly people who remembered the 20s and 30s, one of the ways to really get them to open up to me would be to have them cook. So we would share recipes together, and I would tape record them or video record while we were talking about a family recipe, and so it became such a necessary part of my research. And I did actually compile a bunch of the recipes I collected and put them on my website in case you wanted to read more. But
I'm so thrilled you told me that. I need more food in my life right now.
Calabrese food is from this region in Calabria. It's really special. There's a lot of very special homemade pastas. They eat spicy. They put a lot of chili peppers in.
I love spicy.
Yeah, so it's great. I recommend it.
So, what I had a thought and it left when we started started talking about food. Well, okay, I remember. Is it Assunta? Is that how you say it?
Assunta, yeah.
All
yes.
Right, the mother.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
She is a force, and just so the first when her husband goes to war and she is having to provide food for
all her children. Yeah.
Stella, number one. We'll go into that. We won't go into that too far. But, just the struggle.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I also...
And the meat, just no meat.
No meat. Yeah, there was really... And this is something I knew from my grandparents. They had never eaten meat before they came to the United States. My aunt described they would kill a chicken at Christmas Eve, and that was really all the meat that they saw all year.
Wow.
And then, of course, Italians come here, and we become known for our red sauce culture and meatballs and sausages. And
absolutely.
It's just interesting how, the Italian-American identity is so built on creating prosperity in America after coming from roots of poverty. And it's, that immigrant story I found just so provocative. And I loved connecting with other children of immigrants and hearing their stories and kind of all of us remembering what our roots were and where we came from so recently.
Well, we are a country of immigrants.
We are a country of immigrants.
And Italian Americans are like just a huge part of the backbone of this country.
Yes. And I wrote this piece of historical fiction to honor my own family, not really hoping that this issue would be so much in the news as it is right now.
Yes.
And I just think it's a really important time to think about our immigrant roots and what our forebears struggled through in order to get here.
Exactly.
And also to remember the fact that it's actually much harder to immigrate now than it was when our forebears did come here. There are not the paths to citizenship that our grandparents had, and we should try to have compassion when we think about people suffering these same situations that our grandparents did.
So I don't want to give too much of the book away, but when they are, when Stella and her family are trying to immigrate for the second time, and Mussolini stops all immigration, I was just like, my Lord, these poor people. Yeah. Every emotion is gone through in this book. I just can't express how great it is. But I don't want to tell our listeners too much, I do want to hear about kind of your history.
Oh,
and
sure.
you are, tell us your job role. You are an incredible author, but you also work for...
I've been a book editor for the last 15 years.
Amazing.
I work at Soho Press in New York City, and I'm actually a mystery editor. So Stella Fortuna is not a mystery, but I hope someday I'll get to write a mystery, but I think that's, quite a challenge. So.
I do love a mystery. I mean, so... Tell us some people who are, with the Soho Crime.
Oh, yeah.
Imprint.
So the Soho Crime imprint specializes in international and multicultural crime fiction, which is just such a great mandate for me because I love foreign stories.
Oh, I do too.
Not foreign, but certainly one of my favorite authors to work with is Stephen Mac Jones, who was lucky enough to be here at the Mississippi Book Festival last year, and who just had a wonderful time and who just insisted that we come as well this year, which is something I was so happy to do. But Stephen Mac Jones writes a series set in Detroit, Michigan, August Snow series. I recommend that. And then, don't y'all do the Maisie Dobbs series? We do, yes. We discovered Jacqueline Winspear. We published the first 2 books in the Maisie Dobbs series. You might also know Peter Lovesey, who writes a British detective series, or Cara Black, who writes a French detective series. Yes. Or Mick Herron, who writes a series about failed spies in MI5, which is very funny. So.
I will watch any, I love any sort of British crime drama, anything, show, book. I mean, I'm just so into it. They're British people are so funny. Mick Herron is a funny guy. Yeah, and they're clever. They're so clever, and I just love. I don't know. I enjoy their the wry sense of humor. Yes, exactly. They're just fantastic. So now, tell us a little bit about your kind of you were just telling me you've lived in New York for 18 years. Yeah, that's right. And you have moved to Rhode Island. I have. Is that just a huge change? Well, I grew up in New England. I come from Hartford, Connecticut, which is the first half of Stella Fortuna is set in Calabria, and then they emigrate to Hartford, where there was a very tight-knit Italian-American community, part of the Southern Italian diaspora. And it's where my mom was born and where she grew up. So I lived there before moving to New York, and I'm really happy to go back to New England now because, I loved New York and I loved working there, but returning. It's exhausting. It is really exhausting. Yeah. I mean, I'm from Mississippi. I've lived here my entire life. I love going to New York. One of my closest friends lives there, but by the time I leave, I'm just like, my gosh. I mean, getting from point A to point B is exhausting, but you have the world at your fingertips. Basically. That's also true. I mean, it is the cultural hub of the world. I mean, art for sure. I mean, there's always something happening in New York, and it's all in your backyard. It's true. I would imagine it's easy to take that for granted, too, if you live there. Yeah, or to stop being able to take advantage of it as you focus on your career or your family. And when it's so expensive to live there. It is very expensive, yeah. Yes. All right, so you have children. You just told me. I have a baby. Oh, yeah. You have a baby? Yeah, he's cute. I like him a lot. How old is he? He's 9 months. Yeah. Oh, my gosh. He is a little fresh baby. He is. I left him with his grandma so I could come to Mississippi, and I regret it because I just wish that I could show him everything I've seen. What's his name? His name is Carlos. Oh, precious. Yeah. I'm telling you, boys love their mamas. I hope so. I'm hoping to raise a mama's boy. So yes, exactly. I'm doing everything I can. Love their mothers. To be very Italian about this. For sure. Absolutely. I just watched my nephew with my sister, and he just thinks that she is the most incredible woman in the entire world. I'm like, wow, you just have your biggest fan is just with you all the time. That's amazing. I aspire toward that. So. Yes. Well, he's 9, so and he's been like that his whole life. So you got a good little while. So I was talking to one mother yesterday, and she said, yeah, boys are like that until they're 11 and a half. She's like, but they come back to you. I was like, okay, well, I think it's very different with girls and mothers for sure. Girls prefer their dads usually. I don't, Can't. I mean, I'm kind of partial to both of my parents. I think they're both pretty cool. Well, it's funny you say that though, because
actually one of the things I've thought about more during the writing and then now publicity portion of this book more than anything else is mother-daughter relationships.
Yeah.
Because
they're so complicated.
They are. And the book is set, especially the Italian portion, there's this era after World War I when men were emptied out of southern Italy, both because World War I was hugely costly in life.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, so many young men were lost, a whole generation. But then also people emigrated at that point because they were trying to find opportunity and there just really wasn't any. And that's when the diaspora really took off in the 1900s and 19-teens and right after World War I. So when I was writing about this world, I kept getting women's stories. There were no men involved. It was mothers trying to raise children on their own in a world where women did not have citizenship actually until 1946, so even later than in the United States.
Wow.
So they couldn't control land, they couldn't control money, but they still had to be resourceful and figure out how to raise their kids. And then Stella, of course, she's so close to her mother and she has these very fraught thoughts about motherhood herself. And
absolutely.
It's something I was thinking about so much during the time that I was pregnant and then had just had a baby. And yeah, so it was a very visceral experience writing this kind of mother-daughter story during that life period for me.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, and then, she has such a... Well, I mean,
complicated.
She doesn't really know her father all that well, but what she knows about him
is not so nice.
She does not like him. And
yes.
I totally...
Yeah.
I get that. I see why she felt that way. But, it just, I would not have done well in that time period because the women were so beholden. I mean, they were to serve their husband.
Yeah.
And even though, Assunta, the father immigrated without his family to try and provide a better life. Yeah. And then nobody heard from him, but she still felt that she needed to, obey and serve him.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh!
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting, the nexus of Italian law, which really only gave men any rights at all. But also the Catholic patriarchy. I mean, Italy is a very, very Catholic place.
Very.
And religion continues to play a very big role there. But the patriarchy as it was in the 1920s and 30s was very restrictive for women. And in the absence of men that happened during this immigration period, women had to be very resourceful and creative to just make things happen.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was certainly, there are some very hard passages in the book. They were hard to write. They were hard for me to research. Some of the brutality of life was really tough to think about my own grandmother and her sister going through. But the flip side is that I learned these amazing stories about survival and resourcefulness, creativity, and the humor that they got them through these tough patches. And the Calabres are famous they're famous for being stubborn. That's definitely true. But the other thing that they're famous for throughout Italy is their proverbs. They have these really, often goofy, funny proverbs that kind of take this hard Scrabble lifestyle by the horns and make a joke out of it.
Well, I mean, you can either laugh. It's like that situation you can laugh or cry.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But so I during the course of my research, I went and I took a leave of absence and lived with a retired postman and his wife in this tiny village in Calabria. And they helped me collect so many proverbs. We just would go visiting new families and collecting new proverbs. And so I used a lot of them in the book, but I'll share one with you that's not in the book.
Okay.
So one of my favorites that kind of encapsulates this sense of humor about the patriarchy, but alla gallina fa l'uovo, ma al gallo si brucia il culo, which means in Calabrese, the hen is the one who lays the egg, but the rooster is the one with the sore butt. Which I think is just like the perfect encapsulation.
Oh my gosh.
Of, how people are like, oh, well, this is the women got to just keep going and kind of pick up the brunt of the labor and those men, what are we going to do about them?
Hysterical.
Yeah.
Italian women that I have met, I mean, they're not putting up with any. They are very strong. And they usually have a very amazing sense of humor. Yeah. Maybe a little kind of, not dark. Dark is
yes. Oh, certainly. Yes.
But it's, and I love that.
A fatalistic sense of humor.
Exactly.
Often also bawdy. Lots of dirty jokes. My goodness.
Well,
the first Italian words I ever learned from my grandmother and my great aunt were, I'd ask my mom, hey, Mom, what does fill in the blank. I'm sorry, I can't even say it on the radio, even in dialect, because I don't want to offend your listeners. And my mother would be like, shh, and then she would whisper what it meant to me. I'd be like, oh, wow, why is my 85-year-old aunt using that word when she's describing a cake? I don't know.
Why is it so much funnier when an older person uses profanity? I mean, I'm just like, awesome.
It's great. Yeah.
It is great. Well, so how long did you live?
I did 3 different research trips for about 2 weeks for 2 of them. And the longer period, I went for the winter of 2015. And I just kind of, took a leave of absence from work, and I entrenched because I felt like I could write about the American portions. I could write about the portions that I had taken from interviews and oral histories, but I really needed to get the feeling for living in this village.
Immerse yourself.
Very different lifestyle. Mountaintop villages. Everything is very steep and cold. And even though it's, in the winter, and also very beautiful, and people are still eating food that they grow themselves. They've really preserved a lot of what they were proud about in their farming lifestyle, even now in the 20-teens. So.
Well, food that someone actually grows, like vegetables from a garden.
So tasty.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's just like, it's not even the same species as what you get in the grocery store.
Yeah, no, it's not.
It is so delicious. And that is the food over there, so fresh. Yeah. And I hate to sound so cliche, but there's a lot of love in the food over there. Like pasta, you just don't do that. Because, that's making pasta.
Yeah. That's another proverb that so many, especially wives, repeated to me, that when you do it with love, it's not work. Yeah. Which I thought was something
beautiful.
I really wanted to imbue Assunta with that philosophy, because she loves her children so much, and she does these crazy things to keep them alive, but it's not, for her, it's just, it's an act of love to do that kind of really physical
She
work.
was an incredible character.
Oh, thank you.
Assunta and Antonio are just the antithesis of one another.
Yeah.
Marriage
can do that.
As much as I disliked him, he was a necessary thing. The villain is always, the story is not there if you don't have that person.
Well, I think Stella fights against her father her whole life, but in some ways, rebelling against her father, she's really fighting herself as well. Yeah. And it's the struggle of a lifetime to figure out what you want, and then to figure out how to get what you want. And Stella's very stubborn and clever, but she also has all these restrictions placed on her by her society, and so that was such an interesting character for me to try to develop.
Yes. Tell me, and her sister Tina, say her full name.
So Tina is short for Concettina.
Okay.
Yeah.
I knew I was not saying that correctly in my head.
Yes. No, it's
your accent. It's perfect. I'm like Concertina.
No. If you grow up with it, it's I probably Auntie Tina is my favorite character in the book, because she's the one. All the other characters are fictional inventions, but she's someone I just sort of took wholesale from my own great aunt.
Oh, really?
Who was really the source of inspiration for this story. And I will tell you very briefly, so my grandmother, who inspired the book because of her near-death experiences, was always a cipher to me, because when I was 5 years old, she had a brain trauma and ended up being lobotomized.
Okay, so that actually happened to your
happened, yes.
Wow.
That is a true story. That is a jumping-off point in the fictional narrative. And what happened was my grandmother and my great-aunt together raised me. They took care of me while my parents worked, and I was very close to them. And this accident happened when I was 5. Oh. So I was old enough to realize how traumatizing it was for the family. We now had this matriarch who had been lobotomized, and the hardest part about this was that after the operation, the surgery, she would never speak to her sister again.
Oh my gosh, that really happened.
It did, and they had been best friends. They had married best friends. They had raised children together. Their lives were completely interlocked, and now suddenly, because of this medical event, they could never be in the same room again. And I think starting from the time I was 5 years old, I wanted to overcompensate for what my aunt lost. She lost all of her children and grandchildren, basically, because she hadn't been able to have children herself. So her relationship with my mom and my mom's generation was very close. And I, like I said, overcompensated for what she lost by trying to be very close to her, collecting her oral history, trying to write about her.
Yeah.
And she was such an amazing force of nature. And I just took her pretty wholesale and put her down on the page.
Bless
and
her. She sounds incredible.
Oh, I mean, I really loved her. She was a
well, I mean,
special
she's
lady.
an incredible character in the book. So, I mean, and like you said, you just took her wholesale. That's great. I mean, I can't believe that your grandmother actually had to be lobotomized.
She did, yeah.
I just think of that being so brutal and kind of like a barbaric thing.
It was this is in the late 80s, and at the time the procedure was experimental and they didn't think she would survive it. And I understand now it's actually done frequently, and we were just lucky that there was this cutting edge facility that happened to be cutting edge, literally, that happened to be near us in Hartford that was able to do it. But she survived and she had a miracle recovery, and she lived for 30 more years.
But did she lose pretty much impulse control? I mean,
yes, that's exactly,
wow.
that was the main problem, because she had otherwise she seemed, I mean, she was in other ways inhibited. She would screw up which language she would speak, or couldn't tell reality from what she'd seen on TV. But the impulse control was the worst. So she would actually she woke up hating her sister, and she would try to do her physical violence. So it was a very extreme situation to have an elderly person who needed this care, but also would lash out at her sister, who was her primary caregiver, and one of them. And but they were really, yoked in life, I think, despite 30 years of not speaking to each other. And my grandmother passed away last summer, and then her sister died only a couple months later. So
my gosh, they were just truly connected.
They were really, and I mean, to the end, my aunt would say, I just love her. I don't know what I did wrong. And
I'm going to start crying. Well, I'm pregnant and hormonal. I mean, like, that is...
No, I mean,
wow.
And it was just, that was, I think, one of the reasons I had to write this book. Because I wanted to honor my aunt and all the things she suffered to take care of her family. 30 years. But I also wanted to honor my grandmother, whose true identity had been lost with the lobotomy, and who couldn't tell her own story anymore, because of it. So
I just, I think about getting older, and I'm just like, if my mind goes, I don't.
Yeah, it's my greatest fear as well. To not be able to...
Alzheimer's is truly my greatest fear.
Yeah.
What was that movie that came out? What Alice Forgot with Julianne Moore? And everybody's like, did you see that? I'm like, no. Yeah. I don't need to... Yeah. I mean, that is truly my greatest fear.
Yes, it's definitely loomed large for me growing up with my grandmother and seeing her form of dementia, which was medically induced. So different, but still, it's something, especially the idea of losing your own story and your own ability to tell it is terrifying.
Yeah, and so my mother's mother had Alzheimer's, and her body was fine. I mean, she was physically just fine, but she was just a prisoner of her own mind. She was terrified of all of us.
We done?
Yeah, that wasn't supposed to happen like that.
So do I need to track back a little bit?
Just a smidge and then wrap.
Okay. So yes, my mother's mother also had Alzheimer's, and her body was fine. She was physically totally okay. But I mean, she thought was that we had all gone crazy.
Yeah. And
so she was terrified all the time. And I'm just like, that,
Well, I do hope that this book is read as a paean to our mothers and grandmothers generation, and especially that for me, for writing it was an act of compassion toward the misunderstood grandmothers of our past, who may have had difficult lives where they did things that were unattractive or unfeminine to keep their families together. And if anything, I hope that this inspires readers to look at their own grandmother's stories that may have been difficult or unattractive, and to ask why. Why did she do those things?
Grandmothers are just unbelievable people. I think that's going to be awesome, to be a grandmother, to be such an incredible force and influence on somebody's life. So I guess we both have that to look forward to. I hope.
Who knows?
I hope. So, but Juliet, thank you so much for being here with me today and talking about this book and just your life and how you got your inspiration. Everybody, please pick up this book, The 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna. I've just perused all the reviews on Goodreads. You have so many incredible reviews on there. It's a great book. I love a family epic. I mean, that's my favorite thing. So this was right up my alley. And so thank you for writing this. And I can't wait to see what you do in the future. So thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Ellen, and thank you, Mississippi. I'm so happy to be here.
We are thrilled you're here. We love having you. Thank you.
Right On Mississippi is produced in partnership with Mississippi Public Broadcasting for the Mississippi Book Festival, the South Literary Lawn Party.